The clinking of glasses and soft murmur of conversation filled the dining room, a scene that should have been comforting familiar. Instead, I sat rigidly at the edge of my chair, my hands damp with sweat, my stomach a tightly coiled knot. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. My graduation dinner, the culmination of years of grinding work, lonely nights, endless self-doubt. But as I glanced around the table, I realized something was horribly off. "Well," my father said, his voice cutting through the hum like a razor, "we all know she didn't get that promotion on merit." The room fell silent for a beat, the air sucked out as if the walls themselves recoiled. Then came the low chuckle from my Aunt Grace, and a snicker from my cousin Henry. "She's always been resourceful," Aunt Grace said with a sly glance at me. "Guess the books weren't the only thing she studied," Henry added, his smirk wide and ugly. I felt my heart slam against my ribs, a deafening roar in my ears drowning out the rest of the laughter. I looked at my plate, willing my vision to stop blurring. This wasn't just a casual jab. This was a deliberate assassination of everything I had built. I opened my mouth, desperate to speak, to defend myself, but the words shriveled in my throat. How could they think this? How could they say it out loud like I wasn't even there? The walls seemed to close in. My mother stirred uneasily but said nothing. My father just picked up his wine glass, satisfied, as if he'd merely stated a fact. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. "Don't cry. Not here. Not in front of them." I forced a brittle smile, swallowing my humiliation with the stale taste of roasted chicken and red wine. "Excuse me," I said, my voice astonishingly steady. I pushed my chair back with a screech that silenced even the quiet snickers. Without looking back, I walked out of the room, the house, the nightmare they had disguised as a celebration. The cool night air hit me like a slap, sharp and sobering. I staggered toward my car, my graduation cap still tucked under my arm, a ridiculous reminder of everything I just lost. For a few minutes, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard, like a trapped animal trying to escape an invisible cage. I didn't drive off immediately. Instead, I stared at the house, its golden light spilling warmth onto the porch, a cruel contrast to the ice clawing at my chest. I thought about all the times I had bent myself into pretzels trying to earn their approval. The award ceremonies they skipped, the job offers they dismissed, the birthdays forgotten. And now, when I had finally achieved something undeniable, they found a way to twist even this into something shameful. I wiped my eyes angrily. No, not this time. I'm not going to let them rewrite my story. Pulling out my phone, I booked a hotel a few miles away. I couldn't bear to sleep under their roof another night. As I drove away, my headlights carving a path through the dark suburban streets, a plan began to form. Something quiet, precise. I wasn't going to yell or cry or beg for an apology that would never come. I was going to make sure they heard their own words the way I heard them, and this time there would be no way to pretend they didn't mean them. When I was younger, I thought the silence in our house meant peace. I used to think the silence in my house was safety. It took me years to realize it was just the sound of fear settling in. It was the kind of silence that made you second-guess every word, every action. The kind that made you swallow your excitement before sharing good news, just in case it wasn't received the right way. Growing up under my father's roof was like walking a tightrope in a hurricane. No matter how careful you were bound to be knocked down. Even my biggest achievements were treated like inconveniences, like interruptions to their real lives. I still remember the day I won my first academic scholarship. I had come home practically vibrating with excitement, holding the acceptance letter in my hands like a trophy. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Good. Maybe now you'll stop asking for money," he said dryly. Mom didn't say anything. She just cleared the dishes a little faster, pretending not to notice my flushed cheeks and crumbling smile. The unspoken rule was simple. Be perfect but never outshine them. You could succeed, sure, but it better be the right kind of success, the kind they could take credit for at cocktail parties, the kind that didn't make them feel small in comparison. Whenever I brought home medals, certificates, letters of recommendation, the response was always muted, reluctant, like they were doing me a favor by acknowledging them at all. Success was acceptable only if it stayed quiet and out of the way. I learned quickly that praise was rationed out like medicine, bitter, necessary, and only when they couldn't avoid it. School plays, debate tournaments, even small art exhibits, I stopped telling them about those. It was easier to pretend nothing happened than to watch them twist a moment of pride into a lecture about arrogance. Mom was the most confusing of all. She never mocked me the way Dad and Aunt Grace did. But her silence was sharper than any insult. Mom never mocked me directly. She just looked away every time Dad did. Sometimes silence is the loudest betrayal. There were times, small fleeting moments, when I thought she might say something, when her eyes would flicker with something like guilt. But it always faded. Duty outweighed conscience in our house. As I sat in the hotel room that night after the graduation dinner, memories flooded in, each one like a tiny paper cut, insignificant on its own, but collectively devastating. The birthday party they forgot, the science fair they mocked, the college acceptance they called overrated. There were signs even back then that one day I'd walk away. I just never thought it would hurt this much. I stared at the cheap wallpaper, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room, and realized something gut-wrenching. This wasn't just about tonight. Tonight was merely the final confirmation of what I had known for years but refused to accept. They didn't see me. They had never seen me. Not as a daughter. Not as a person. Only as a reflection of what they wished they could be, or a reminder of everything they weren't. A tremor of anger pulsed through me. Not the explosive screaming kind. Something colder. Sharper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate to make them understand. I was desperate to make them feel what they had made me feel for so long, invisible. And as I sat there, surrounded by second-hand furniture and the sterile scent of hotel soap, the plan began to take shape. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to let their own words do the talking. The hotel room felt colder the longer I stayed. Not physically, but that creeping kind of cold, the one that starts somewhere in your chest and spreads outward until even breathing feels like a battle. I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. The bed creaked under my restless movements as I stared at the ceiling. The words from dinner replaying in endless loops. She probably slept her way to the top. Always good at getting what she wants. The more I heard them in my head, the more detached I became. Like I was floating outside my own body watching it crumble. I thought about going home the next morning, pretending this night had never happened. It would be easier. Cleaner. After all, wasn't that what I'd always done? But this time something inside me had snapped. It wasn't rage. Not really. It was the kind of cold, calculating fury that demanded action, not noise. I realized then that silence wasn't always weakness. Sometimes silence was strategy. As dawn clawed its way through the heavy hotel curtains, a decision crystallized in my mind. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I would document. I would expose. I would mirror back the ugliness they spewed so carelessly. The idea was simple in theory, brutal in execution. Over the years, I'd heard more cruel remarks, more casual dismissals, than I cared to count. They were stored somewhere inside me, like old bruises you forget until someone presses just the right spot. Now I would turn them into evidence. I grabbed my notebook, the same battered one I'd used through college for class notes and study plans, and opened a fresh page. At the top I wrote, "Everything they said." And I began. The time Dad laughed about how women like her can never lead, only follow. The night Aunt Grace said, "It's cute how you think hard work matters more than connections." Henry's offhand comment during Christmas dinner last year. "She'll marry someone rich. That's the plan, right?" Each memory surfaced with painful clarity. Each one was a tiny betrayal I'd shrugged off to survive, now illuminated under the cold fluorescent hotel light. I wrote furiously, the pen digging deep grooves into the cheap paper. Every cruel comment, every dismissive chuckle, every loaded silence that screamed louder than words. Took hours. My hand cramped, my eyes blurred. But I didn't stop until I had filled 20 pages, front and back. And then I went further. I flipped open my phone, scrolling through old text messages, family group chats, social media posts. It was all there if you looked closely enough. The microaggressions, the condescension wrapped in fake concern, the jokes that were just jokes until they weren't. They had built a case against themselves over years. I just had to assemble it. By midday, I had compiled it all. The conversations, the screenshots, the passive-aggressive comments disguised as family banter. I printed it out at the hotel's tiny business center, page after damning page. As I gathered the stack of papers, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of finally facing the truth without excuses. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to change, but they were going to see themselves, raw, unfiltered, through my eyes, and this time they wouldn't be able to look away. By late afternoon I was ready. The hotel printer had churned out stack after stack of pages, each one a testament to years of quiet cruelty. I slid them carefully into a plain manila envelope. No letter, no note, just the truth, cold and heavy. The plan was simple. Deliver the evidence where they couldn't ignore it, but do it in a way that left them guessing, unsettled. I waited until nightfall. There was something fitting about moving through the dark, silent and unseen, just as they had moved through my life, leaving bruises I had been trained to deny. The street I grew up on hadn't changed much. The cracked sidewalk still caught the wheels of cheap strollers. The old oak tree still leaned too far into the road, casting twisted shadows under the streetlight. My parents' house stood exactly as I'd left it, warm light glowing from the kitchen window, the porch light buzzing faintly overhead. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. Each step felt like shedding another layer of fear I'd carried for years. I crossed the front lawn quietly, the grass damp under my sneakers. At the doorstep, I hesitated for just a second, long enough to feel the weight of what I was about to do. Then I slipped the envelope under the door and turned away without knocking. It was almost anticlimactic. No confrontation, no shouting match, just the silent delivery of a reckoning years in the making. As I walked back down the street, I didn't look back. The next morning, the first message came from my mother. "Did you send something to the house?" I didn't answer. Then Henry. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I still said nothing. Finally, my father. "You better explain yourself. This isn't funny." For once, their panic wasn't my problem to solve. I spent the day at a coffee shop near the hotel, working through my emails, pretending the entire world wasn't burning down a few miles away. It was strangely liberating to know that the chaos unfolding wasn't mine to clean up. That evening, my phone vibrated again. Another message from Henry. "Are you happy now?" I turned the phone over without replying. Happy? No, I wasn't happy. But I was done being small to protect people who only knew how to break me down. And that was enough. The first real crack appeared the second day. I was sitting by the hotel window sipping lukewarm coffee when the barrage started. Not just messages now, but calls, voicemails, even emails titled urgent. The panic in their voices was almost comical after years of pretending they held all the power. My mother's voicemail was a rambling mess of confusion and wounded pride. Henry's was angrier, accusations laced with fear. But it was my father's call that caught me off guard. For the first time in my life, his voice wasn't cold or condescending. It was small, tenuous, fraying at the edges like an old rope. "We need to talk," he said simply, like that would erase everything. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. They weren't reaching out because they loved me. They were reaching out because they realized their facade was cracking wide open. Later that afternoon, I got another email. This one from Aunt Grace. "Whatever you're trying to prove, you're destroying this family." The irony was so rich it almost made me laugh out loud. Destroying the family? They had shattered it long before I ever picked up a pen. Still, a part of me ached. Even when you know the house is burning, part of you still grieves when the roof finally collapses. I spent the evening walking aimlessly through the city streets, the neon lights blurring into a surreal haze. A tiny, treacherous voice in my head whispered, "Maybe you're going too far. Maybe you should fix this." But then I remembered sitting at that dinner table, invisible, while they gutted me with laughter. I remembered every eye roll, every dismissive shrug, every tiny humiliation. I hadn't broken the family. I had just refused to carry the weight of their cruelty anymore. And for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected knock at the hotel room door. Heart pounding, I peered through the peephole. It wasn't one of them. It was a courier. He handed me a package, no return address, just my name scrawled hastily across the top. Inside was a cheap silver picture frame. The photo inside showed my family at my high school graduation, years ago. Dad's hand gripping my shoulder too tightly, Mom's smile brittle, Henry scowling in the background. There was a sticky note stuck to the glass. "Remember who your family is." My fingers curled around the frame, and for a moment, I almost let the guilt win. Almost. But then I set the frame gently face down on the table, picked up the envelope I had prepared the night before, and walked toward the exit. The final part of my plan was about to begin. The invitation came unexpectedly. Aunt Grace sent a mass text to the family. Family barbecue Sunday. Bring your appetites and good vibes. The irony nearly knocked the wind out of me. Good vibes? In that house? For a moment I considered deleting it, pretending I never saw it. But then a sharper thought cut through the fog. What better stage for the truth than a celebration they thought they controlled? I texted back a simple, "I'll be there," heart hammering harder than I cared to admit. That Sunday afternoon, the sun blazed mercilessly across the yard, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving light. The smell of burning charcoal hung heavy in the air, mingling with laughter that sounded brittle around the edges. I stepped through the backyard gate like a ghost returning to haunt the living. No one rushed to greet me. A few awkward nods, a muttered "hey," and the conversation resumed without me. If they thought ignoring me would erase what I'd done, they were about to learn otherwise. Dad was manning the grill, flipping burgers with exaggerated cheer. Henry nursed a beer in the corner, scowling into his phone. Mom busied herself arranging condiments with frantic precision, as if the right placement of ketchup bottles could hold the universe together. I waited until everyone had a plate in hand, mouths full, distracted. Then I pulled out my phone. The recording wasn't fancy, just audio clips stitched together. Nothing edited, nothing enhanced. The raw ugliness of their own words was more than enough. I hit play and set the phone on the patio table. The sound turned all the way up. At first, they didn't notice, just murmurs blending into background noise. But then the unmistakable sound of my father's voice cut through the chatter. Women like her aren't built to lead. They're built to follow orders. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Aunt Grace's laughter from a different night rang out next. Hard work? Please. She's probably sleeping with her professors. The laughter around the backyard died in an instant, replaced by a suffocating silence. Henry's voice snarled from the speaker. She thinks she's better than us just because she has some fancy degree. She'll fall flat on her face soon enough. I watched them one by one as recognition dawned. The widening eyes, the stiffened shoulders, the desperate glances. No one moved. No one spoke. The recording played on, unrelenting, a brutal mirror held up to their faces. Even Mom paled, her hand trembling around a plastic cup. When the final clip faded into silence, I reached out and calmly stopped the playback. The patio was so quiet you could hear the flies buzzing around the half-eaten potato salad. I let the silence stretch, heavy and damning. Dad opened his mouth, then shut it again, his jaw working furiously like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. "This isn't fair," Aunt Grace finally burst out, her voice shrill. I tilted my head. "Isn't it?" I said quietly. "Every word came from you. I'm just playing it back." Henry stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair, but no one moved to pick it up. The spell was broken. The masks had slipped. There was no polite fiction left to hide behind. I looked at my mother, searching for something, remorse maybe, or at least shame. All I saw was fear. Not fear of what they'd done, fear of being seen doing it. And in that moment I understood. They weren't sorry. They were just sorry they got caught. I picked up my phone, slid it back into my pocket, and stepped away from the table. No one tried to stop me. No one called after me. I walked out of the backyard, out of the house, out of the lies they had woven like spiderwebs around my life. I didn't slam the gate behind me. I didn't need to. The finality was in the silence they couldn't escape. I didn't go back to the hotel that night. Instead, I found myself driving aimlessly, the city lights bleeding into one another, the hum of the car engine a distant, soothing noise. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, cleansed, like I had finally cut out a tumor I didn't realize had been growing inside me for years. By the time I pulled into the dim parking lot of an all-night diner, the sky was already hinting at dawn. I ordered coffee I didn't really want and sat by the window, staring out at nothing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to come after me. No frantic calls. No desperate apologies. Just the steady, overwhelming silence of freedom. My phone buzzed once on the table. A text from Mom. "We're family. We should stick together. Funny how that sentiment only appeared after exposure, never before. I didn't answer. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to fix things, trying to earn love that should have been unconditional, trying to patch a boat that had been sinking long before I was even born. I thought about the younger version of me, wide-eyed, desperate for approval, who had spent so many nights wondering what was wrong with her. There was never anything wrong with me. There was something wrong with the foundation I had been forced to build my life on. And now, for the first time, I had the power to choose where I stood. Sipping the bitter diner coffee, I opened a blank note on my phone. No long explanations. No dramatic farewells. Just a simple truth they could never erase. I choose peace. Not you. I hit send. Blocked the number. Set the phone face down on the table. And just like that, the cord that had tied me to them for so long finally snapped. I finished my coffee, tipped the waitress far too much, and walked back to my car under the pale, tentative light of a new morning. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know exactly where I was going. But for once, the road ahead was mine alone to choose. And that was enough. It's been months now. I thought cutting ties would feel like ripping off a limb, like losing something vital. Instead, it felt like shedding a heavy, tattered coat I should have discarded long ago. The first few weeks were strange. There were moments when I'd reach for my phone instinctively, expecting a call that never came. Times when loneliness hit like a sudden wave, cold and disorienting. But the loneliness didn't kill me. It made room for something else, peace. I moved to a new apartment, small, imperfect, but entirely mine. I painted the walls colors my family would have mocked. I hung art they would have sneered at. I laughed too loudly, played music too late, lived too freely. For the first time, every inch of my life reflected who I was, not who I had been forced to pretend to be. I made friends who didn't ask me to shrink. I built routines that weren't about proving my worth to anyone. Sometimes at night I still hear echoes. The old criticisms, the old doubts. You think you're better than everyone. You'll never make it without us. But now those voices sound like distant radio static. Annoying, irrelevant, easy to turn off. I didn't walk away from my family because I hated them. I walked away because I finally loved myself enough to stop accepting less. And that's something they could never teach me because they didn't know how. Some lessons you have to learn the hard way. Some victories don't come with parades or applause. Sometimes winning just means quietly refusing to lose anymore. Today, as I sit in my little apartment, sipping coffee on my mismatched couch, I realize I'm not broken. I'm not lost. I'm not missing anything. I'm whole. And if anyone ever asks me why I left, I'll tell them the truth. Because I deserve better. And finally, I believe that. 6 months later, the city felt like an entirely different world. Or maybe it was just me who had changed. I walked down the quiet streets on a crisp Sunday morning, a cup of cheap diner coffee warming my hands, the air sharp with the first hints of fall. There was no ceremony to this new life. No fireworks, no triumphant background music. Just a steady growing sense of rightness in my bones. I passed by an old bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a thrift shop. A place I had often dreamed of visiting when I was younger but never dared. Back then, time wasn't mine to waste on wandering. Back then, I was too busy trying to be useful, invisible, perfect. Now I stepped inside without hesitation. The bell above the door gave a cheerful chime as I entered. The smell of old paper and warm wood wrapped around me like a second skin. I browsed without urgency, my fingers trailing over cracked spines and faded covers. In the back corner, half hidden by a crooked shelf, sat someone I hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Ellison, my high school English teacher. The woman who once pressed a copy of The Bell Jar into my hands and whispered, "You're allowed to want more." She looked up, startled, then smiled. A genuine crinkling at the corner smile. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said warmly. "You look different. Not thinner. Not prettier. Just different. Lighter." We chatted awkwardly at first, the way people do when years have stretched thin between them. But it didn't take long for the easy rhythm to return. She asked about my life, my work, my plans. And for once, I didn't hedge or downplay or rush to justify myself. I told her about my new job at the small publishing house. About the apartment with the uneven floors and the neighbors who baked too much. About the messy, imperfect, joyous life I was building from scratch. She listened without judgment, without interruption. And somewhere between stories about misplaced manuscripts and broken washing machines, I realized this was what being seen felt like. No conditions, no bargaining, just acceptance. As we said goodbye, Mrs. Ellison touched my arm lightly. "You always had wings," she said. "You just finally remembered how to use them." Her words landed deep, anchoring something that had been floating loose inside me. I stepped back into the chilly morning, heart thudding with a quiet kind of happiness. Not the frantic, desperate kind that demanded constant validation. The slow, steady kind that grows when you stop begging and start belonging to yourself. Walking back toward my apartment, I thought about all the things I had lost. The illusions, the forced loyalty, the desperate need for approval. And I realized none of those things were losses at all. They were weights I had mistaken for anchors. Now unburdened, the path ahead stretched wide and wild, uncertain, unwritten, mine. As I turned the corner onto my street, sunlight spilled between the buildings, painting the cracked sidewalks gold. I smiled to myself, small, quiet, certain. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Not every wound is meant to heal the way we expect. Sometimes healing looks like choosing yourself, over and over and over again. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the blank pages ahead. I was ready to fill them, on my own terms. Not every family story ends with forgiveness. Not every wound needs to heal back the way we expect. Sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you'll ever do. And that's okay. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace, or if you're still finding the strength to choose yourself, share your story below. Let's remind each other. Healing isn't weakness, it's power.